Good day! Today we're going to have a glance at selected Philippine political caricature in Alfred McCoy's Philippine Cartoons, Political Caricature of the American Era, dated back 1900s to 1941. We will also know its significance and discuss the analysis of the political caricatures during the American period. So now we're going to talk about the selected Philippine political caricature in Alfred McCoy's Philippine Cartoons, Political Caricature of the American Era. So what is a political caricature or cartoon? Political cartoons and caricature are a rather recent art form which veered away from the classical art by exaggerating human features and poking fun at its subjects. Such art genre and technique became a part of the print media as a form of social and political commentary, which usually targets persons of power and authority. Example for this print media is the newspaper. In the newspaper, you can find the editorial page in where you can find a human figure nga na ay dako kay goo o gamay kay lawas, very different from the measurement of its head. So, it is the example of exaggerated human features which usually targets persons of power and authority. Cartoons became an effective tool of publicizing opinions through heavy use of symbolism, which is different from a verbose written editorial and opinion pieces. The unique way that a caricature represents opinion and captures the audience's imagination is a reason enough for historians to examine these political cartoons. Commentaries in mass media inevitably shape public opinion, and such kind of opinion is worthy of historical examination. Yes, it's true, kaya nagrepresent siya usa ka situation or characteristics of one person. For example, in politics, kasagaran nimo makita dito sa editorial page ang mga issues or panghitabo, especially when we talk about power and authority. Cartoonists express their ideas through cartoons sa mga panghitabo, for example, in the Philippines, in which kasagaran nimo makita issues like corruption or about the economy or how the leader lead its people. So before we're proceeding to the examples of this caricature, we will be talking about the author, Alfred W. McCoy. Alfred L. William McCoy was born on June 8, 1945, an American historian and educator. He is the Fred Harvey Harrington Professor of History at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He specializes in the history of the Philippines, foreign policy of the United States, European colonization of Southeast Asia, illegal drug trade, and Central Intelligence Agency covert operations. His interest in Filipino history allowed him to master the Hiligaynon dialect and understand the political situation, not just the region of Iloilo, but of the whole country. With the help of Alfredo Roses, the designer of the book, McCoy published Philippine Caricature. In his book, Philippine Cartoons, Political Caricature of the American Era, dated back 1900s to 1941, Alfred McCoy, together with Alfredo Roses, compiled political cartoons published in newspaper diaries and periodicals in the aforementioned time period. One of his dissertations tackled the factional conflict in the colonial economy of Iloilo, Philippines from 1937 to 1955. This Philippine Cartoons is a compilation of 377 editorial cartoons and caricatures made by various Filipino artists that tackled the situation during the American occupation in the Philippines. Dated from 1900s to 1941, each individual caricature recorded national attitudes towards the coming of the Americans, as well as the changing mores and times. Some of the cartoons presented the condition of Filipino farmers on the hands of American tenants, who self-owned the lands of the laborers and imposed unbearable and unjust taxes on them. The cartoons also compared the job situation of a Filipino and an American by portraying unequal salaries despite having the same nature of work, which highlighted racial discrimination in terms of work condition, wages, job opportunities, and career positions. Now we'll be proceeding to the examples of these cartoons. First example was published in The Independent on May 20, 1916. The cartoon shows a politician from Matondo named Dr. Santos passing his crown to his brother-in-law, Dr. Barcelona, a Filipino guy, that one who's wearing a salakot, and Barong Tagalog was trying to stop Santos, telling the latter to stop giving Barcelona the crown because it is not his to begin with. The second example was also published by The Independent on 16 June 1917. This was drawn by Fernando Mersolo and was aimed as a commentary to the working of Manila police at that period. Here we see a Filipino child who stole a skinny chicken because he had nothing to eat. The police officer was relentlessly pursuing the said child. A man wearing salakot, labeled Juan de la Cruz, was grabbing the officer, telling him to leave the small-time pickpockets and thieves and to turn at the great thieves instead. He was pointing to a huge warehouse containing bulks of rice, milk, and grocery products. The third example was a commentary on the unprecedented cases of colorum automobiles in the city of streets. The Philippine Free Press published this commentary when fatal accidents involving colorum vehicles and taxis occurred too often already. The fourth cartoon depicts a cinema. A blown-up police officer was at the screen saying that couples are not allowed to neck and make love in the theater. Two youngsters looked horrified while an older couple seemed amused. The next cartoon was published also by the Independent on 27 of November 1915. Here we see the caricature of Uncle Sam riding a chariot pulled by Filipinos wearing school uniform. The Filipino boys were carrying American objects like baseball bats, whiskey, and boxing gloves. McCoy, in his caption to the said cartoon, says that this cartoon was based on an event in 1907 when William Howard Taft was brought to the Manila Pier riding a chariot pulled by students of Liceo de Manila. Such was condemned by the nationalists at that time. The last cartoon was published by Lipang Calabao on 24th of August 1907. In the picture, we can see Uncle Sam rationing porridge to the politicians and members of the Progresista Party, sometimes known as Federalista Party, while members of the Nacionalista Party look on and wait for their turn. This cartoon depicts the patronage of the United States being coveted by politicians from either of the party. McCoy was able to provide a comprehensive background to each caricature to give readers details of the turbulent period the Filipinos have experienced under the hands of the Americans. With the help of Alfredo Roses, who designed the book and contributed an essay on Philippine graphic satire during the American era, Alfred McCoy was able to publish Philippine cartoons as a secondary source of different political caricatures drawn during the said period. So, kani nga caricatures kay nag-clarify sa historical information o nahimong eye-openers sa realidad nga na-experience sa mga Filipinos during the American occupation. It also reflected sa anti-American sentiments in addition to the condemnation of the ruling class, which gave us a glimpse of the Philippine society of the past, visualize its historical politics, and appreciate the representations of perceptions of the Filipinos at that era. These political caricatures became relevant in presenting the current situation of the country, especially at that period, American era, because it served as primers for engaging the people in prevailing opinion. Now we're going to know the significance of these political caricatures during the American era. So why are these political caricatures significant for the Filipinos during the American colonial period? It is because it gained full expressions during the American era. Filipino artists recorded the national attitudes towards the coming of the American and as well as the changing war in times. It is also significant in the mapping of the history by the sense of analyzing the editorial cartoons from a particular period in time. It may be possible for one to get a glimpse of what shaped events at that particular time, though they lack detail and sufficient content to tell a whole story. They do hint on important social and political development. Now, what is the purpose of caricature? Caricature is a way to enhance the basic essence of a person, creating an interesting version of them with a touch of humor. It is best when complementary and often used and or in to entertain people.
Continuations.
This time, we will proceed to the analysis of the political caricatures during the American period. The transition from the Spanish colonial period to the American occupation period demonstrated different strands of changes and shifts in culture, society, and politics. The American drastically introduced democracy to the nascent nation, and the consequences were far from ideal. So, ang Spanish colonial American occupation period kay nag-demonstrate og nagkalain-lain nga changes sa culture, society, and politics. And also, ang American kay drastically introduced democracy to the nascent nation, and ang consequences and mga pangyayari or consequences kay layo sa tinuoray. The post-independence and the post-Filipino American period in the Philippines were experienced differently by Filipinos coming from different classes. The upper Principalia class experienced economic prosperity with the opening of the Philippine economy to the United States, but the majority of the poor Filipino remained poor, desperate, and victims of state repression. Ang post-independence and the post-Filipino-American period in the Philippines kay naka-experience pod og lain-lain by Filipinos gikan sa lain-lain pod nga mga classes. And the upper Principalia class experienced also the economic prosperity with the opening of the Philippine economy. So ang Principalia class kay naka-experience po the prosperity together pag-open sa Philippine ekonomiya or ang Pilipinas economy to the United States, but the majority jud ani niya kay ang mga poor Filipino kay nang still pobre gyapon sila og desperate or desperada and victims gyapon sa state repression kay di ba kung pobre ka dili ka maka-fight sa imong rights kay lagi wala kay kwarta and mo na siya ang state repression kay ang state repression good kay kanaman siyang naay force like military force kanang kusgan og walay makapilde. The selected cartoons illustrate not only the opinions of certain media outfits about the Philippine society during the American period, but also paint a broad image of society and politics under the United States. So, ang mga napili nga cartoons kay illustrate dili lang sa mga opinion sa media about sa Philippine society during the American period, pero apil pod nag-paint og board kay mga image sa society and politics nagikan sa United States. In the arena of politics, for example, we see the price that Filipinos paid for the democracy modeled after the Americans. So, like for example, matan-on na to ang price sa Filipinos nga gibayaran kay tungod sa democracy. Then, ang model dito kay ang Americans. Patronage also become influential and powerful, not only between clients and patrons, but also between the newly formed political parties composed of the elite and the United States. Ganing patronage or pangtangkili kay it also become influential, na influence siya and powerful, dili lang sa client o patrons, but also sa newly formed political parties composed of the elite, sa mga napiling tao o sa United States. Thus, the essence of competing political parties to enforce choices among the voters was cancelled out. So, ang katong mga pagkompetence sa political parties kay paron mo enforce para mo taas ang mga choice sa voters kay gi-cancel na to siya. The public continues up to present where politicians transfer from one party to another depending on which party was powerful in specific period of time. The transition from a Catholic-centered Spanish Filipino society to an imperial American assimilated one, and its complications were also depicted in the cartoons. One example is the unprecedented increase of motorized vehicles in the city. So, ang transition sa Catholic-centered Spanish Filipino society to Imperial American assimilated one is nag-complicate ni siya sa depict sa mga sa cartoons. O ang example ani kay katodong unprecedented increase of motorized vehicles in the city. Another example is what McCoy called the sexual revolution that occurred in the 1930s. Young people as early as that period disturbed the conservative Filipino mindset by engaging in daring sexual activities in public spaces like cinemas. So, lain po nga example ni McCoy ani kay gitawag og sexual revolution nga nahitabo pag last 1930s. Ang mga batan-on nga mga tao kanang sa bata pa nilang edad kay na disturb ang ilang conservative Filipino mindset. They engage during the sexual activities in public spaces like cinemas. Hantod karon nahitabo gyapon ni siya. Lastly, the cartoons also illustrated the conditions of poor Filipinos in the Philippines now governed by the United States. So last, kay ang cartoons nga na-illustrate naghatag po ni siya conditions or situation sa mga poor Filipinos sa Pilipinas na pangunahan na sa United States. Another example is a cartoon depicted how police authorities oppress pretty Filipino criminals while turning a blind eye on hoarders who monopolize goods in their huge warehouse. The other cartoon depicts show Americans controlled Filipinos through seemingly harmless American objects.